Okay, it's preparing now. If everybody's ready.
I can go ahead and start us off.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Natalie Williams, a senior who is majoring in political science with an emphasis in peace and justice studies. You'll have to excuse me, I might sound a little sick. I'm getting over a cold. On behalf of the Utah Intermountain Forum, a coalition of student clubs at Utah Valley University, I'd like to welcome welcome everyone to our lecture today. I would also like to welcome you to the American Founding Lecture and thank our honorable guest, former House Representative Robert L Livingston, for joining us. This event has been made possible thanks to the History and Political Science Department of Utah Valley University, in particular, Dr. Jay Desart, Chair for the History and Political Science Department, and the Gary Herbert Institute for Public Policy. First, I'd like to turn the time over to Dr. Bakhtabek Abdrasayev.
Thank you, Natalie. As you may already know, one of the key projects of our students work on throughout the semester in this class, Political Science 1000 American Heritage, is the Family History assignment. This assignment asks students to make a personal connection to our American founding through interviewing family members about their family history. And we have today an excellent opportunity to learn about family history for such prominent statesmen as the Honorable Robert L Livingston. And I would like to thank our distinguished guest for agreeing to speak before our class as part of the American Founding Lecture. My wife Cholpon and I have known and respected his wife Bonnie and him for more than 26 years as very close friends of the people of the Kyrgyz Republic and us as well. And now I turn the time to Alita Thompson, who is the instructional assistant to this class and also the president of the Utah International Mountain Forum, a coalition of student clubs at Utah Valley University.
Thank you, Dr. Beck. This event has been implemented through the Inclusive Co-Curricular Student Engaged Learning Method, or SEL. SEL is where students work together to address real-world issues with a faculty member serving as a mentor. Student clubs, such as the Utah International Mountain Forum, serve as the core of the model as an inexpensive tool that can be used by any academic institution worldwide. Today's event and this series has been hosted and implemented by UVU students led by Natalie Williams. I will turn the time back to her to introduce our guest speaker today, the Honorable Robert L Livingston.
Thank you, Aletha. I'm excited to introduce our esteemed guest, Chairman Robert L Livingston. Robert L Livingston was elected to the United States House of Representatives in a special election in 1977, the first Republican to represent Louisiana's 1st Congressional District in 102 years. Mr. Livingston served as a member of the House Appropriations Committee through most of his time in Congress, as well as the House Select Committee on Intelligence for the maximum period of 6 years. In 1998, Livingston was chosen by his peers to serve as Speaker Designate for the 106th Congress. Prior to his almost 22 years in Congress, Mr. Livingston practiced law in both public and private fields for 9 years. Mr. Livingston earned a bachelor's degree and a Juris Doctorate degrees from Tulane University and is a graduate of the Loyola University Institute of Politics. In 1981, he received an honorary doctorate from Our Lady of Holy Cross College in New Orleans, Louisiana, and in 1990, an honorary order of the Coif from Tulane Law School. A Navy veteran, Mr. Livingston served on active duty with the United States Navy as an enlisted man from 1961 to 1963 and received an honorable discharge from the U.S. Navy Reserve in 1967. Following his departure from Congress in February 1999, Mr. Livingston established the successful lobbying firm, the Livingston Group, in both Washington, D.C. and in New Orleans, Louisiana. His recently published memoir, The Windmill Chaser, received enthusiastic acclaim. He lives with his wife, Bonnie, in New Orleans, Louisiana. They have 3 sons, a daughter, and 8 grandchildren. Mr. Livingston, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Mr. Ambassador and Chopin. It's great to see you both. It's been many years since we've seen each other in person, but as you mentioned, 26 years ago, we had the great pleasure to officially visit Kyrgyzstan and to meet you and to work with you in Washington. And I just want to thank you for inviting me to do this. This is a great opportunity for me. So I appreciate it very much. And to all of you in the class, hello. I hope you're enjoying the much colder weather than I am here in New Orleans. It's a lot warmer here, and it's Mardi Gras time. So if you've never done Mardi Gras, I invite you all to come down either this time of year or any of the years to follow. New Orleans always knows how to have a good time. And we're glad to be back. I haven't been to a Mardi Gras in many years, actually. I've been in D.C. for the last 46 years. We just moved down here about 4 months ago. The ambassador tells me that you're really interested in the heritage and how it relates to my current public service. And Natalie has done a great job in giving you a quick resume of my background. I wasn't born to the manor, so to speak. I was born, my father lived in New York, my mother in Colorado. They met at Colorado College during World War II. And my father joined the Army from college, and then they got married and moved to New York. They stayed there just a very few years, maybe 2 or 3 years, moved to Colorado, and then down to New Orleans. By the time I was 6 years old, I always said that I made a career decision to move to New Orleans when I was 6 years old, because that's in effect what I did. I grew up there. I had no political background whatsoever, even though, as you'll see in a few minutes, I had some heritage here. But my father was probably the first person, Livingston, to come to Louisiana in well over 100 years, maybe 150 years. So it was just an accident that I ended up in New Orleans, which is also the first district of Louisiana and for Congress. And so I grew up in an environment that was totally apart from politics. My father decided to do other things. He left when I was about 7 or 8. So my mother raised my sister and me, and her parents were great to support us. We went to good schools. We grew up in the city, graduated, and then I went to Tulane University. And after the first year, joined the Navy for a couple of years, where I happened to circle a little island called Cuba in 1962. I think that they called that the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the ambassador was probably stuck in the Soviet Union under different circumstances. But I was on an aircraft carrier, and I never realized how serious it was until later on, years later, I heard that Fidel Castro had said he'd blow the carriers out of the water if it had been up to him. But fortunately, it wasn't up to him. It was up to Nikita Khrushchev, and they ended up settling it with President Kennedy. And I'm still here. So I wouldn't have been if they hadn't settled. In fact, I think half of the world wouldn't have been here. But I'm glad they did. Went back to college and got an undergrad degree, a law degree, practiced law for a couple of years in civil law, didn't like civil law. Unfortunately, I became a criminal prosecutor with the local U.S. Attorney's Office in New Orleans. Stayed there 3 years. Tried civil law again, still didn't like it. Went to got another prosecutorial job with the local DA's office as one of the top prosecutors there, and then with the Louisiana Attorney General's office. And then one day, the then congressman for 36 years decided he wasn't going to run for office. And the Republicans hadn't gotten elected but twice in the last 100 and something years. We had elected a Republican in the 3rd district only by 1971. He later, that was Dave Train, he became a governor. He was my mentor. I actually worked for him in his law firm, and we were good friends. And then Henson Moore in the 6th District of Louisiana in Baton Rouge. And they were the first Republican congressman since Reconstruction. But all of a sudden I got a call because the guy in the 1st District was retiring after 36 years. And they said, would you be interested in running? And because I'd been active in Republican politics by that time. When I first registered to vote, I registered as a Democrat. But Lyndon Johnson, the President Johnson, convinced me that I must be a Republican because I wasn't too fond of Lyndon Johnson. And I wasn't too fond of the way he ran the Vietnam War. So I became a Republican, got active in the circles, and they called me out of the blue and they said, you want to run as for Congress? And I hadn't even given it a thought. But in 2 weeks, I'd quit my job. I'd moved across town because I didn't live in the district, and I had $5,000 in the bank, and I was running for Congress. I ran for about 6 months. The guy that beat me, and he did beat me narrowly, was nice enough in January, the following January, when he got sworn in, to be made ABC's typical freshman congressman of the year, which meant they followed him everywhere from January when he was sworn in till July when he went to prison. And he went to jail, and I had another shot at it, and I won the special election narrowly, but I won the special election and stayed in Congress for 22 years. Now, why am I telling you all of that? Well, Ambassador says that he's interested in how I got involved in politics by sheer accident. By absolute accident. But the fact is, I do have a heritage, and some of not on both sides. My mother's family actually started Furman University and were academics and doctors and things like that. But my father's family goes back to about 1660, roughly, when the first Robert Livingston came to New York, and at that time, it was a very rural area. It was controlled by the Indians, and the Dutch had moved up into the northern part of the Hudson River. And he could speak fluent Dutch, and he could speak fluent French, I guess. And because of his ability to speak different languages, he was from Scotland. He was his father had been a very successful preacher in Scotland. He goes up there and starts negotiating with the Indians, and over time acquires a great deal of land. And he became the first Lord of the Manor of the Livingston aristocracy. He handed it down to the second Lord, a guy named Philip, who handed it down to the third Lord, who's Robert. And that by that time, it was about the 1770s. And each of those families, by the way, had 10 children. So they were growing exponentially. By the time of the Revolution, 1776, there were probably 40 or 50 or 60 significant Livingstons, all derived from the first guy. And several of them were in the Continental Congress. They held all sorts of political local offices. Ultimately, one became governor of New Jersey, William Livingston. And one cousin of mine, whose grandfather is a direct ancestor, was Robert Livingston, who in April 30th, 1803, as minister of France, bought Louisiana, doubling the size of the United States of that time. What's significant about April 30th, 1803? Well, only that 140 years to the day later, to the day, I was born on April 30th, 1943. I don't know what that means, but that's always stuck in my craw. And interestingly enough, he had a younger brother by the name of Edward, who was also very successful. But before I get to Edward, Robert actually swore in George Washington also on April 30th of 1786. So April 30th is a big day in Louisiana history. But his younger brother, Edward, 20 years younger, was mayor of New Orleans and mayor of New York and chief customs collector, and had served in Congress in New York. And he ran into a scandal and left New York, quit his job. Thomas Jefferson was president at the time. And he goes down to Louisiana, and he spoke fluent French. He was a brilliant lawyer. He wrote the Louisiana Civil Code that is used today. He wrote the Louisiana Criminal Code that was not adopted because he was very liberal and didn't believe in capital punishment. And he held seats in the Louisiana House of Representatives, in the State House, in the State Senate, and then the first district of Louisiana congressional seat. Why is that significant? Because for 22 years, I served in the first congressional district of Louisiana, the very same seat, 100 and some odd years later. So there's a lot of commonality. It really is totally coincidental. I can't say that I had anything to do with it. I just kind of bumbled along and ended up in the same place that some of my forebears had been. But by the way, Edward Livingston, the same guy, was aide de camp to General Jackson, Andrew Jackson. And when Jackson defended New Orleans in the Battle of New Orleans in 1813, and was the last battle, it might have been January of 1814, was the last battle of the War of 1812. And made sure that the Mississippi River stayed in the hands of the United States and didn't get turned over to Britain, in which case this country would look a lot different had we lost that battle. Edward Livingston was his aide de camp. And when General Jackson became President Jackson, Edward Livingston became his Secretary of State and was also a U.S. Senator. So his political career and that of his older brother were far more significant than mine. I've just been one little congressman. And after I quit politics, after 22 years in Congress, I started the Livingston Group, which I do today, and have run that lobbying firm. Even though I'm a lawyer, I loved criminal prosecution, but you can't make any money on criminal prosecution. So I became a practicing lobbyist, which I always say is not a four-letter word. It's an important word. You represent clients trying to get their interests represented in Congress, and you work with members of Congress. Just as a lawyer goes to court representing his clients, getting their interests represented, well, a lobbyist understands the political process, and you do the same thing in the political forums in my case, in the U.S. Capitol, but it goes on in every single state capital around the country, including Utah. So that's a good summary. If I guess you can make up your own minds. But if you'd like to ask me a few questions, I'm ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you sharing about your family history. I don't even think I had a full understanding of just how many family members have been so closely tied to New Orleans and Louisiana's political history, but also, of course, your important ancestors who have had a great deal of influence in our American founding as too. I hope that our students find that just as interesting as I do. So yeah, I'd like to start us off by asking a few questions. I'll ask one of my own first, if I may. I had the pleasure of reading your article, The Need for Regular Order, and we're sure to send that out to our students too, so they may ask you a few questions about that as well. But something that really struck me in your article is that you suggest that reducing the amount of time Congress members spend fundraising is necessary to return to regular order. And I was wondering, with your experience in Congress, how we might be able to prioritize the actual public policy making over fundraising.
Well, it's a matter of leadership, Natalie. And I have to tell you that when I came to Congress, Tip O'Neill of Massachusetts was the Democratic Speaker of the House. And regular order existed, and he was a wonderful guy. And he was succeeded by Tom Foley, who was also a great Democratic Speaker of the House. Both good guys, and regular order entailed the system of working in regular fashion, meaning that the committees would meet during beginning Monday afternoons through Friday, and that the committees and subcommittees would call witnesses, and members would show up at the hearings and listen to what the witnesses testified to, and then work up their own legislation in a bipartisan fashion. Send it to the subcommittees, would send it to the committees would send it to the floor of the House, and it would be voted on and move over to the Senate and go through the same process. In recent years, that process has just been destroyed, and I mean destroyed. The leadership, primarily of the Democrat Party and primarily under Speaker Pelosi, but also to a significant extent under then Speaker Dennis Hastert, and to a lesser extent John Boehner, the leadership started acquiring the power. They started centralizing and removing the discretion from the committee chairman and the subcommittee chairman to exercise their independence and determine what kind of language, what kind of legislation could come through their committees. And it became a situation where the parties, Republican or Democrat, would determine whether that's good or not good enough to satisfy all their members, without regard to compromise, without regard to the best interests of the people on the other side. And I want to tell you, if you think you get good legislation under those circumstances, you're simply wrong. The fact is, it takes people on both sides to negotiate and to work with one another, and to get good legislation that satisfies all interests out of the Congress, and so that it can adequately govern the American people. I think the Constitution of the United States envisions a compromise. It envisions negotiation. When James Madison drew up the Constitution and fought for it back at the beginning of the country, he foresaw that too much power in the hands of too few people is a sure way to despotism. I mean, I know that Ambassador Abdrisov has seen despotism from the other side of the world. Well, if we don't watch it, it could happen here. Ronald Reagan said that we're only one generation away from losing our freedoms here. And the way you can lose your freedoms is if one party becomes too strong and ignores the rights of the minority. And so my pitch for regular order is for both sides to have an equal opportunity to make their case. Certainly the majority's got to make to fine tune and control the process. But the way it has been frankly under Speaker Pelosi has been that she didn't brook any dissent. She didn't allow her committee chairman, her subcommittee chairman, to have any real voice in some of the legislation that was passed. When legislation was passed to the center through the process, she had to approve it or disapprove it. And if she disapproved it, it didn't get through. And if she didn't have all of her preferences in the legislation, it wouldn't get through. She would create basically what she wanted, and good luck to the people in her own party for making the legislation better. And there wasn't any opportunity for the people in the other party, the minority party, in this case the Republican Party, to do it. In my opinion, that did not work. And I'm hoping that Speaker McCarthy, now that he's taken over the House of Representatives, will change that and bring regular order. I suspect, I already see a significant change just in the last few weeks, but we'll have to wait and see whether that continues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that we have a student in the chat who wanted to ask a question. Brittany Vanderpool, you're welcome to jump in and ask your question.
Brittany?
If not, I know that my fellow instructional assistant Aletha also had a question, so I'll go ahead and turn it over to her.
Natalie, Brittany is there.
But
Is she-
Brittany's
Oh,
trying.
Brittany's
There she
here?
is.
Okay.
Hi. Are you muted? I think you're muted. Yeah, you're muted. Brittany, you're muted. Yeah, it's
Maybe
still muted.
we'll give Brittany a second to sort out the technical issues. Aletha, go ahead and ask your question as well.
Lisa, you're muted.
I know better too. Brittany, if you want to put in the chat, we're welcome to pull you out too. Mr. Livingston, so a lot of what we do at Utah International Mountain Forum is advocacy for small rural towns and mountain communities. And I know in a lot of our efforts and research, we've seen that many feel they don't have a voice or representation within the United States government because it usually goes to people where either the money is or where there's a higher population. And for instance, my town in southern Utah has a small population, but only about 60% of people have internet. And because of the infrastructure, it's $180 for less than half a gig. And so a lot of these people feel neglected in that they don't have anyone to talk to and have to rely purely on themselves. And based on your experience, what would you tell them and how can they advocate more and get a voice within our Congress?
Well, every person in America has the right to petition their representatives. And the way you do it is most congressmen from most districts, there are what, 435 all around the country, hold office hours and do town hall meetings around the district. And so the best way is to go to check their schedules, call their offices. You can just these days you can do Google, or you can get the numbers, the local numbers of the members of Congress, go to their district offices, or simply call them, their people on the phone in Washington. Right? I have to say, you're not likely to get the congressperson if you call, but you're going to get a staffer. And the whole purpose of the staffers is to listen to the people back home. In this case, the rural access to computers is improving with every day. And I notice that in the war between Russia and Ukraine right now, one of the reasons the Ukrainians are able to communicate with anybody is because Elon Musk put his system over Ukraine and has given better access to communication than they had even before the war started. So technology is there and it's coming to rural areas. The U.S. Congress has actually passed some legislation in the last year or two that encourages development of better communication in rural areas, but that takes time to develop, and it is a money thing. But I think that with technology becoming cheaper and cheaper, you're going to find within the next 5 years that problem will probably be solved. But in the meantime, you want to contact your member of Congress at his office, at her office, through their representatives, or go to their town meetings. I used to have town meetings all around my district, and people would come from all over the district, and some of them would just absolutely raise hell. But that's part of the process. A member of Congress ran for the job. They got to be prepared to accept the good with the bad, and they'll get compliments and they'll get criticism. And some people are not shy about that criticism.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I saw, or unless Letha, you have a follow-up question?
I am good. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. I saw Kia Graham put a question in the chat. Kia, you're welcome to come off mute and ask your question. If not, I can also read it for you. Okay, not seeing Kia, I'll go ahead and ask the question. Kia said, thank you for sharing your background and your family heritage. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing about all the connections and similarities you recognize between you and your ancestors. How did you learn about your family heritage? Did you learn about it as a child, or did you research it on your own as an adult?
Since my dad left when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I didn't really get a lot of it from him. Although I did get some. I saw him about 2 or 3 times in his life after that, but I can't say that he gave it to me. But I was always interested in the heritage, and I would read about it. I mean, and history is. I didn't study much history when I was in college. I really didn't. It was only afterwards that I started getting into my heritage at the same time as other general history of the beginning of the country and various other facets of our history. The best way to do it is to pick a person of interest and to read about that one person and his or her interplay in the history of the country. And if you get a good book on a good person who's an inspiring person, the chances are that one book will lead you to others to explore. And that's frankly what I did when it came to the revolutionary days and the input from guys like Jefferson and Madison and Hamilton and whatnot. And I've read books on all of those guys, and George Washington and of course the Livingstons. But I mean, that is a fascinating time of world history, not just U.S. history. And those men, they were mostly men, but the women participated as well. But they produced the most remarkable document, I think, that other than the Bible in the history of the world, because ultimately the Constitution of the United States has led to the freedom of more people than any other document was ever written. And it's enabled the United States to become the richest, freest country in the world. But as I said, we can squander it. And I fear for the country these days, because they're a lot less peaceful than those days in which I grew up, which were very peaceful.
Thank you. That was wonderful. If I may, I have another question as host privilege. I'll go ahead and ask it. How could peace and justice studies, as a peace and justice studies student, I'm very interested in reconciliation, mediation, negotiation, and I was wondering how you think peace and justice studies concepts could be further introduced into Congress to further promote bipartisanship and reconciliation between our two major parties.
Well, it's incredibly important. I mean, I think it's really great that you asked that question and are so motivated. I had lots of Democratic friends, even though I was a Republican congressman. I traveled with Democrats. We socialized with Democrats, and that's not really true in Congress today. They don't, in fact, Republicans don't talk to Republicans. Democrats don't talk to Democrats. Social media, you would think, would broaden the discussion for everybody. But in truth, it's really narrowed it, because it's individuals paying solely attention to social media of people who agree with them. And they're not hearing from the other side. And if you don't hear from the other side, you don't know what the other side is thinking. And if you don't know what they're thinking, you don't want to negotiate with them. And all of a sudden you start attributing motivation to them that may not at all be true. But if you think that they're really ill motivated, then gradually you may think that they're evil people, and you don't want to have anything to do with it. And all negotiation, all bipartisanship breaks down completely. So I worry about social media. I think that we've really got to be very, very careful with it. We're learning it's a new phenomenon, and I'm not sure that it's the answer to all our ills. We have 24-hour television, 24-hour news services. We have a media of all sorts. And if the media sides with one side, they don't necessarily give you the other side. And all of that is really dangerous. But it's up to the individual to open their ears and not ascribe motivation to people that don't agree with them, but to discuss and negotiate and to listen, because the other side's probably got some pretty good points that people can live with too, regardless of which side you're on.
I completely agree. Thank you. And I think that really speaks to a lot of the dissatisfaction that a lot of people have with our federal government right now, and feeling like there's not a place for them, and seeing how there's maybe this dysfunction that you talk about. I see our students are very engaged. They've got lots of questions in the chat. So let me come here and let's see. I know that Jacob Nielsen submitted a question before our panel or our discussion today. I just posted it in the chat. Jacob, I think you're here. Would you feel comfortable unmuting and asking your question? If not, I will also read it for you. And with that, I'll just...
Sure, yeah.
Which
question was it? I know I asked a couple.
Yeah, I just posted it in the chat. So you can go ahead and read it there, but it has to do with, yeah. Do you see it?
Oh, yeah. All right.
Perfect.
So my question for you was, what's the hardest part about becoming and being a congressman?
Well, if you think that a member of Congress simply has to get elected and sit back and enjoy the prestige of being a congressman or woman, you're wrong. The hardest part, Jacob, is time. You're going a mile a minute. First of all, if you're going to get into a campaign and win, you got to be everywhere, every place. You got to shake every hand. You got to kiss every baby. You got to go to every event. You got to be going 24 hours a day. I mean, I would go and say for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'd have to find a weekend just to collapse, because I'd have to get a new breath to try to keep going. That's the campaign. And then you can't slow down if and when you get elected. And I have to say, just for every person that runs, only fewer than half, and probably significantly fewer than half, ever win. But if you're lucky enough to win, it's a great job. I had a wonderful time. I mean, you get to meet some extraordinary people, and I did get to look into fascinating issues, and I got to travel to fascinating places like Kyrgyzstan and other places. And really, I was very interested in defense and foreign policy. And so those fields took me all over the world. But the hardest part, again, was balancing your time and not getting so exhausted that you couldn't make any sense. You're working from morning to night, and you don't slow down. And I suspect Natalie might ask a question about financing, because it was on the list of stuff that I read. But members of Congress today have to do all the stuff that I did, but they also have to raise money. Back in my day, I got elected. Well, I first ran for office, as I said, with $5,000 in the bank. I didn't have any money. I moved my family across town. I was broke. You can't do that today. You got to raise a lot of money to get elected, in any congressional position, or and even worse in Senate. I think those guys, the people running for Senate, raise millions and millions of dollars, and it's not unusual to raise millions of dollars in a race for Congress. That means you got to be on the telephone all the time. Whenever you have a spare minute, you gotta be calling people for dialing for dollars, as they say, so that you get enough money to run for office. I don't like that. I never liked raising money. I had the good fortune when I was chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and when we balanced the discretionary part of the budget for the first time in decades, and the last time since then, we did a good job. But all I had to do was sign a letter, a fundraising letter, and then it was effectively the money would come in to finance the various campaigns, which I didn't use in my campaign, but I used for other people. These days, everybody's dialing for dollars, and they're constantly trying to raise big bucks, and it takes time. And it takes time from the committee process that they engage in, the subcommittee process that they engage in, the local politics that they get involved in, the congressional politics that they get involved in. All of these things demand their time and attention, but now you add to that the fact that you got to spend time raising money. I think it's appalling, because as I said in that letter, in that column I wrote, people go up to Congress and then all they do is raise money. Well, they're not there to raise money. They're there to legislate. And so I have suggested, and did in that column, that okay, you can do that through Monday afternoon, but then after that you got to quit during any congressional session when Congress, either on the floor or in the committees, your committees, you can't raise money at those times. And I think that would make a big difference in their attention span to the reason they're there. They're there to legislate. And they are there to hear evidence to justify good legislation. And if they don't hear the testimonies, if they don't hear the witnesses, they don't hear, if they're not paying attention to their jobs in the subcommittees and full committees, then they're simply wasting time. And if they're wasting time, all they're doing is raising money, then they shouldn't be there. They should be somewhere else.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston, and thank you, Jacob, for submitting that question. I believe that Brittany's question, Aletha was able to see and is willing to read. Aletha, would you like to read Brittany's question?
Yes, she has her daughter with her tonight too. With a lot of what we do, we want families involved too. So starting with her daughter wants to know if you inherited the quill that was used by your ancestor. And Brittany was wondering if you feel pressure to live up to a certain standard with such a legendary family line.
Well, to the first question, no, I didn't inherit much of anything, and certainly not the quill. I would love to have it; that'd be great. But no, the closest I've come to a lot of the product of my relatives is to read about it. I know several Livingstons, cousins in New York. Some of them are very wealthy, but you have to remember, the first guy came here in the 1600s. He had a family of 10. Each of them had families of 10. Each of them had families of 10. I figure I got 2 million cousins all around the country. So, and some of us are very rich, and some of us are very poor, and some of us are just in the middle, like me. So no, I didn't have the good fortune to get all that good stuff, particularly that quill. That would be wonderful. What was the other question? I'm sorry.
The other question was if you felt pressure living up to your lineage.
Yeah, there's always that pressure, and every public official should feel that pressure of wanting to hold themselves, himself, herself out as a good representative, and not get the criticism, not get the bad press that some get. And yes, I have to tell you that I'm very sensitive to that. Nobody likes to be criticized in the press, and nobody likes to read about themselves in an unfavorable light. But it happens. And in political life today, it can be very tough. It's a tough game. And so it's very possible that people will criticize you, and sometimes with justification, and oftentimes without. But it's something that you always think about, and whether you've got a long line of heritage or not, you shouldn't, if you're going to be in public life, you don't want to do things that you're going to read about in the newspaper unfavorably. So you got to amend your conduct accordingly. But sometimes stuff happens, and you can't predict it, and you can't prevent it. It just happens.
Thank you. And thank you, Brittany, for putting that question in the chat and having your daughter here with us as well. Seeing how much time we have left, we still have 15 minutes, but before we get too much further, I wanted to give some time to Dr. Abdrasayev and see if he has a question to ask.
Natalie, I would like again to give more time for our students, because there are so many incredible questions and really interesting one, and we need to convince our guest that his family history is so interesting for us, and he is teaching us also how to do our assignment as well. So please, if you give more time for our students.
Wonderful. Well, hearing that, we have another question submitted by Tia Lowry, which I will go ahead and put in the chat for her to be able to read. So Tia, please watch out for that in the chat. I'm posting it now. And if you feel comfortable, please come off mute and go ahead and ask your question.
But I pass on one important issue that I've learned on to other generations. Get into public service. If you want to get into public service, you got to want to serve other people. Don't do it for yourself. Don't do it for just because it's a neat job. Commit yourself to helping others. And over the years, I think we've helped tens of thousands of people in one fashion or another. And you try to make their lives a little bit better. But again, you have to work hard at it. But the trick to there is to listen to people and have empathy and understand that some people are really hurting. Because some people are just not enjoying the great fruits of life that other people enjoy. So they need help. That's why a member of Congress usually has a staff to help them. Each member of Congress who gets up in the House of Representatives gets about 18 people, and some of them do Social Security and immigration problems and various other problems. But you get specialists, and so if you have a specific problem, you can call the congressman and just talk to that specialist. But the members of Congress generally hire people who are like them and project their image. And if you have, so it's important to get good staff. If you don't get good staff, then people think that, well, you don't care about them and you're not going to be there very long. I'm not sure I really answered that question, but I'd be happy to take another shot at it if whoever that was.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you. To get back to our conversation of bipartisanship, we had a student submit a question. What's one thing about the opposite party to your own that you value?
Well, I guess I have to look at it in terms of time. My own party, the Republican Party, is one more of individual freedom than the Democrats. Democrats, yes, believe in winning. We both do. But Republicans want low taxes, low interference from government, lesser degree of government, and more individual freedom. Democrat Party believes that government should take care of people, which means a greater government, higher taxes, more interference by in the lives of people by government, because government knows best, and government employees know better than the average person. They haven't really embraced in recent years the private sector as having better ideas than government. I don't believe that. I happen to believe that the private sector is, because of it's a merit system. You generally don't get hired unless you're really good at what you do, but that's changing. And what we see just in the last few years is big corporations are becoming increasingly allied with big government, and the freedoms of the individual are being eroded. And I am concerned about it. What did I best admire about the Democrat Party? I liked most Democrats when I was going through politics. I enjoyed it. I am not a socialist. I am not a big government advocate, and I probably wouldn't have admired the philosophies of those who proposed that kind of thing when I was in Congress. Unfortunately, in my opinion, today in the Democrat Party, that philosophy is a lot more prevalent, and I don't think that it's working in our best interest.
So to say then one thing you value about the Democratic Party might be that with your time in Congress, you realize that people who are in the Democratic Party are normal people too, right? Is that?
Oh, sure, absolutely they are, and there's still a lot of great Democrats. And as I said, I started out as a Democrat. Yeah, but we've kind of gone to our corners, and we're developing walls between us, and I worry about that. I don't think that's working very well. Also, there's these strange phenomena about the organizations that advocate violence in the streets. I did, when horrible things happened 2 or 3 years ago, and people were unfairly hurt by policemen. The result was to eliminate all policemen, defund the police departments. That's nuts. I mean, that's not going to work. We all need police. In the minority communities who suffer the most without police, they suffer at the hands of the criminals. We need more police, but we need to train them right and not have them do things like just happened in well, that poor guy got killed in, where was it?
Minneapolis. Yeah.
In Minneapolis.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, we just got to, you got to have a balance, but police are critical to a stable society, but they've got to be well trained, and they have to be solid people who aren't going to be criminals themselves. So it's a balance, and I think Republicans by and large would support well-trained policemen. Some on the other side say we don't want any policemen, and I don't think that's the answer.
Thanks, Mr. Livingston. I see that Kia Graham in the chat has another question. She can't come off mute, but she did ask, were you named after your ancestor? If so, do you feel that being named after your ancestor helped guide you in your personal life, work, and mission? Do you name your children after any of your ancestors?
Well, that's I haven't been asked that in a long time, but I have to say my name is Robert Linlithgow Livingston. Linlithgow is a Scottish name, as is Livingston. Linlithgow is, there actually was a castle of Linlithgow in Scotland, and I have seen it. It was, I think some college kids went in there about 100 years ago and threw a big party and burned it down. So there's only the remnants of Linlithgow Castle today. But I saw a sign that said Livingston that way and Linlithgow the other day. My father was Robert Linlithgow Livingston. His father was Robert Linlithgow Livingston, and his father was Robert Linlithgow Livingston, and my son is Robert Linlithgow Livingston, and my grandson is Robert Linlithgow Livingston. So yes, we've kind of handed it down. It's a family name, and I think the Livingstons, our family, has been very traditional in that sense, and has kept the heritage at least through the names, and perhaps that helped me be inspired to study more of my heritage.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, seeing we only have a few minutes left, I think we have time for one more question. Christian Keaton put in the chat, what is the biggest impact you feel you made while you served in Congress?
Well, there were a lot of them, obviously, but I think the most important one is that when I was chairman of the Appropriations Committee and served in that capacity, I was on the committee for over 20 years, but I was chairman for 4 years during Bill Clinton's presidency. And in Bill Clinton's first 2 years, he was a traditional Democrat and spent a lot of money, just like President Biden has in his first 2 years. Republicans were elected for the first time in 40 years to control the House of Representatives in 1995. And I took over as chairman and was chairman for 4 years. I held my first hearing as chairman with 3 items. The first one was a little knife that I found from trappers down in our area called an alligator skinning knife. It was about that long. And then I said, we're going to cut the budget. We're going to skin it. And then I said, and I pulled out another one. It was a Bowie knife, about that big. And I said, if the little one doesn't work, we're going to chop the budget with the Bowie knife. And with that, and I can't demonstrate it, but I said, if that doesn't work, and I pulled out a machete, which is about 3 feet long. I said, then we'll chop the budget. That was a metaphor for what we did for the next 4 years. We started cutting the budget, the discretionary budget, because entitlements are totally different. And the entitlements, the mandatory spending of the U.S. budget is automatic, and we didn't touch that. But the discretionary budget pays for the cost of the president and all the executive agencies and the police and the defense and everything, the energy department and so forth. Veterans and whatnot. And I was able to successfully cut the budget with President Kennedy's knowledge and in negotiation with him, so that when I left in 1999, we had the first balanced budget in 20 or 30 since Jack Kennedy's time. And Jack Kennedy was a budget cutter too, by the way, President Kennedy was. But it was the first time, and we actually cut the budget and balanced it for the next 2 years. But then 9/11 came along, and that just blew the hell out of the budget. And everybody started spending on wartime and everything else, and it hasn't been balanced since. When I left, we had a national debt of $5 trillion in 1999. The national debt today is $31 trillion. Just in what, 23 years, 24 years, $5 trillion to $23 trillion. That's amazing. It's astounding. It's unacceptable. And it poses great difficulty for all of you young people, because if the government can't pay their debts, they're going to just automatically raise taxes. Well, if they raise taxes, how are you going to make a living? It's a big problem, and they need budget cutters back. They don't have them in this administration, and I'm hoping that the Congress would wise up and and start cutting back. But it's not just the discretionary budget. They've got to tackle the mandatory budget as well.
All right, thank you. Seeing how that's our time, I'll just close off by saying thank you so much, Mr. Livingston, for joining us here today. We do have a gift we want to send you, so I'll be in contact with you after this meeting today in order to arrange that. But I know this was really beneficial for our students. It was a pleasure to have you here. And with that, I'll say goodbye to our students. And yeah, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador Chopin. It's so
Thank you.
wonderful to see you all. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you all. Good luck
Thank you
to
much.
you. Wish
Thank
you
you.
well. Run
Thank
for
you.
office. We need you.
Same to you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.